2026 marks 250 years since America won its independence, and the Springfield Armory wanted to highlight one man's contribution to gaining that independence. That is why the Springfield Armory National Historic Site hosted a family-friendly event in honor of Henry Knox. Knox was a founding father of the United States, known for his expertise in military science. The event held yesterday shined a spotlight on the noble train of artillery, a 300-mile winter expedition led by Knox that brought heavy cannons that had been captured at Fort Ticonderoga to Boston, helping secure one of the Continental Army's earliest strategic victories.
We are home to Henry Knox's diary. He kept this diary of this journey from Fort Ticonderoga to western Massachusetts. The diary does not make it all the way to Boston, but it gives us a sense of the logistical challenges that he faced, but also of all the really wonderful individuals, the Teamsters he worked with, hired, and worked with along the way to Boston.
The Springfield Armory National Historic Site is our nation's first ever armory, formed under the authority of then General George Washington in the beginning of the Revolutionary War. It holds the world's largest collection of United States military small arms.
Even if you're not interested in history, the story is really important for Americans who are trying to find a unifying story at this particular time. It's really important to study as to how military affairs worked and how the infrastructure of rural America worked.
If you'd like to learn more about Knox and the history of America in its 250th year, you can visit the Springfield Armory National Historic Site on Armory Street, of course, in Springfield.